She had never imagined that life could turn so suddenly. Just a few months ago, she had been living a quiet, ordinary existence. Moving from one temporary job to another, always struggling to make rent and pay for groceries. Every day felt like a battle against time and bills. Every night was spent worrying about what would happen if she fell behind again. Yet she held on to her hope, even if it was small, that one day things might change. She had no idea how fast that change could come. And she certainly had no idea what kind of doors it would open. It started with a simple message. She had been scrolling through her emails after a long day at work, her head aching from standing for hours and her feet aching from shoes that were too small. Most of the messages were spam or promotional offers, but one stood out. It was concise, professional, and yet strangely intriguing. It was an offer not for a regular job, but for something different. Something she had only seen in movies or read about in stories. It was an opportunity to spend time with someone wealthy, someone influential, someone who needed a companion for social events and private dinners. The payment was generous, more than she could have earned in months at her current jobs combined. At first, she hesitated. The idea made her uncomfortable. She had always believed in earning her living through honest work, through jobs that did not involve stepping into someone else's world for money. But the more she thought about it, the more practical it seemed. She was tired of living paycheck to paycheck. She was tired of the stress, the constant worry, the feeling that life was slipping through her fingers. This was a chance, maybe the only chance, to secure some stability. To breathe for a while without the pressure of endless bills, she decided to reply. She kept her message polite and professional, careful not to reveal too much about herself. Within hours, she received a response, brief but clear. An interview was set not in a typical office, but in a quiet, upscale hotel lounge, a place that immediately reminded her that this was not an ordinary job. She dressed carefully for the meeting, choosing something simple but elegant, wanting to appear confident without seeming pretentious. Her heart raced as she approached the hotel, her mind filled with questions and doubts about what she was about to do. The moment she entered the lounge, she noticed him immediately. He was sitting at a corner table, alone, looking relaxed, yet commanding. His presence was magnetic, a mix of calm confidence and subtle intensity that made it impossible to ignore him. He was dressed in a tailored suit that fit perfectly, and his eyes, though not unkind, carried a depth that made her curious. When he smiled, it was brief and understated, but it reached his eyes, making her feel both welcome and slightly exposed at the same time. They exchanged greetings, polite and formal at first. He explained the arrangement clearly, outlining the expectations, the rules, and the boundaries. She listened carefully, asking questions to ensure she understood exactly what was required. It was not a romance, he emphasized, not at least in the traditional sense. It was companionship, social presence, someone to attend events with, someone whose company he could enjoy without the complications of ordinary relationships. She nodded, understanding the arrangement, though part of her felt uneasy about the line between professionalism and intimacy. The first meeting ended with the offer of a contract, straightforward and fair. She took the contract home, reading every word, considering every clause. It was legal, it was clear, it protected both of them. Still, she felt a mix of apprehension and excitement. Accepting it would mean stepping into a world she had never known, a world of wealth, power, and secrecy. It would mean leaving behind the safety of ordinary life and embracing uncertainty for the chance of something better. After much thought, she accepted. Signing the contract was not easy, but it was a step toward freedom, toward financial stability, toward a life that felt possible rather than impossible. The first few days were strange. She received guidance on how to present herself, how to engage in conversations, how to remain poised in social situations she had never experienced. She learned about etiquette, about subtle cues in body language, about the importance of discretion. Everything was polished, refined, and yet there was an undercurrent of genuine connection that she could not ignore. The billionaire, for his part, was careful. He maintained a professional distance, observing her reactions, her manners, her ability to adapt. Yet, he was not unkind. There were moments when he allowed small glimpses of his personality to show. A quiet sense of humor, a thoughtful comment, a brief story about his past that hinted at struggles beneath the surface. She found herself listening with interest, not just as a participant in a job, but as someone genuinely curious about the life he led behind the closed doors of wealth and influence. As the days turned into weeks, she found herself settling into the routine. There were dinners, charity events, private gatherings, and trips that required her presence. She learned how to navigate conversations with people whose lives were completely different from hers. People whose concerns revolved around power, legacy, and social status. She discovered that she was not only capable of holding her own, but that she could bring warmth, attention, and authenticity to these interactions. Qualities that money could not buy. Her relationship with him began to change subtly. The transactional nature of their meetings remained, but the tension between professionalism and personal connection grew. She noticed the way he looked at her when he thought she was not noticing. The small gestures of care that went beyond what was required by the contract. He began to ask her opinions, to share brief insights into his decisions, to seek her perspective on matters she would never have imagined having a say in. Slowly, the walls between them began to soften, though neither of them addressed it openly. One evening, after an event that lasted late into the night, they found themselves alone in a quiet suite, away from the prying eyes of the social world. She was tired, her mind filled with the noise and expectations of the evening, yet she felt a strange sense of comfort in his presence. They spoke, not about business, not about arrangements, but about life, about small moments, about things that mattered to them personally. She discovered that behind his composed exterior was a man who had faced loneliness, pressure, and the weight of responsibility. She listened, not as an employee, but as someone witnessing a rare, genuine glimpse of another human being. He noticed her attention, her genuine interest, and for the first time, he allowed himself a small, unguarded smile. It was fleeting, yet it lingered in her memory. She realized that their connection, though born out of necessity, was evolving. It was subtle, quiet, and not yet defined, but it existed, undeniable and delicate. The realization brought with it a mix of excitement and fear. She wondered what it meant, what it could lead to, and whether she was prepared for the emotions that were beginning to surface. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The routine continued, yet each meeting carried the weight of possibility. She began to notice patterns, small habits, preferences, and quirks that made him human, relatable, and surprisingly vulnerable. He, in turn, began to rely on her presence, not just for the sake of appearances, but for the comfort, honesty she brought into his carefully managed life. Their conversations deepened, their shared moments became more meaningful, and though unspoken, a trust began to grow between them. She also began to learn about herself. She discovered resilience she had never acknowledged, the ability to adapt, to navigate worlds she had never imagined being part of. She found courage in facing uncertainty and stepping into situations that were intimidating. In holding her own among people whose lives were worlds apart from hers, she realized that she was more than her struggles, more than her fears, more than the bills and deadlines that had defined her existence for so long. She was capable, intelligent, and deserving of opportunities she had never dared to dream about. Even as she grew more confident, there was an undercurrent of caution. She reminded herself constantly of the nature of their arrangement, of the boundaries that had been set, and of the importance of maintaining her independence. She understood that feelings could complicate the arrangement, that attachment could lead to vulnerability, that the world they inhabited was not one in which mistakes could be easily forgiven. Yet, despite her carefulness, the human heart is rarely so predictable, and she could not ignore the warmth, the intrigue, and the subtle connection that had begun to take shape. One afternoon, as they sat across from each other in a quiet cafe after a series of meetings, he looked at her differently. It was not a look of business or necessity, but one of quiet acknowledgement. She caught herself meeting his gaze longer than necessary, noticing the flicker of something unspoken in his eyes. For a moment, the noise of the city, the weight of the contracts, the pressures of social expectation faded, leaving only two people sharing a space, a moment, a fleeting connection that felt entirely their own. She realized then that this experience, which had begun as a simple financial arrangement, had become something more. It was a journey into a world she had never known, a test of her courage, her adaptability, and her emotional intelligence. It was also a journey into understanding another human being, someone whose life was vastly different from hers, yet who shared the same basic need for connection, understanding, and trust. And so, life continued in this delicate balance. Each day brought new challenges, new expectations, and new opportunities to learn, to grow, and to navigate the complex dance between professionalism and personal connection. She knew that nothing about this world was simple. Yet she also knew that she had found a place where she could belong, if only for the moments they shared, if only for the quiet understanding that existed between them. She did not yet know where this arrangement would lead, what secrets were waiting to be uncovered, or how their connection would evolve. She only knew that she was alive in a way she had not been before, that she was learning, experiencing, and witnessing a world that was both beautiful and complex. And in that there was hope, there was excitement, and there was the quiet certainty that life, in all its unpredictability, had a way of surprising those who dared to step into it with courage and an open heart. As the days passed, the arrangement continued, but something between them began to change. What had started as a clear agreement with rules and boundaries was slowly shifting into something more complex and unexpected. She noticed it first in the small moments, the quiet gestures, the attention to details that went beyond what was necessary. He would remember her favorite coffee, the way she laughed at certain jokes, or the books she mentioned in passing. It was not required, and it was not expected. Yet he did it anyway, and it made her feel seen in a way she had rarely experienced. She, in turn, began to notice herself responding differently. She no longer felt like just a companion fulfilling a contract. She started caring about how he felt, about his moods, about the weight he carried in his private life. She found herself wanting to make him smile, wanting to ease the tension she sometimes saw behind his composed face. At first she thought it was curiosity, perhaps simple interest in understanding someone so different from her own life. But the feelings were growing stronger, subtle but persistent. A pull she could not ignore. Their conversations began to deepen. They spoke about things that mattered to them, things they did not discuss with anyone else. He shared stories from his childhood, moments of struggle and loneliness, times when he had felt the pressure of expectation more heavily than he could bear. She listened, offering empathy, a listening ear that he seemed to crave. For her part, she began to share parts of her own life, small truths about her fears, her hopes, and her dreams. Each revelation was measured, cautious, yet it created a bridge between them, a sense of understanding that could not be bought or sold. One evening, after a long day of events and meetings, they found themselves walking together through a quiet part of the city. The streets were dimly lit, and the sounds of traffic were distant. She noticed how relaxed he seemed when there was no audience, no expectation, no social pretense. He laughed freely at a joke she made, and she realized that moments like these were rare and precious. She felt a connection that went beyond the contract, a bond formed by shared experiences and mutual understanding. He began to trust her with more than just his thoughts. She observed how he interacted with people, how he navigated complex situations, how he handled pressure and decision-making. She saw the loneliness behind his power, the weight of responsibility that rested on his shoulders. It was not easy to witness, and it made her feel both protective and empathetic. She wanted to be someone who could bring a little light into his life, someone who could offer comfort, even in small ways. As time passed, they developed routines and habits that felt natural. They would meet for early morning coffee before important events, sharing quiet moments before the world demanded attention. They would review schedules together, discuss small details, and even laugh about minor mishaps or awkward situations. These routines were not part of the contract, yet they became a comforting rhythm in their lives. She found herself looking forward to these moments, to the connection they offered. to the sense of belonging she felt when she was with him. Despite the growing closeness, there were moments of tension and uncertainty. She was aware of the transactional nature of their relationship, and she reminded herself constantly of the boundaries they had agreed upon. She worried about misreading signals, about allowing her feelings to become too personal. At the same time, she could not ignore the warmth and attention that he offered. The subtle ways in which he was showing that he valued her presence for more than just her company at events. It was a delicate balance, one that required awareness and careful navigation. He too seemed to struggle with his feelings. There were times when he would retreat, moments when he seemed distant or preoccupied. She realized that he was not accustomed to trusting people easily, that vulnerability was something rare and precious to him. She learned to respect his space, to be patient, and to allow the connection to grow at its own pace. This patience created a foundation of trust, a sense that whatever was happening between them was authentic. Even if it was unspoken and undefined. One afternoon, they attended a charity gala together. It was a lavish event with people she had never met before, individuals whose lives were vastly different from her own. She felt nervous initially, but he guided her through the evening, offering quiet support and encouragement. She realized that he valued her presence not just as an accessory, but as someone who could contribute, who could offer insights and perspectives that mattered. She felt proud not just of her ability to navigate this world, but of the trust he placed in her during the gala. They shared a quiet moment on a balcony overlooking the city lights. The view was breathtaking, and for a moment, the noise and pressure of the event faded away. He spoke softly, sharing thoughts and reflections that were not meant for anyone else to hear. She listened attentively, feeling a deeper connection than she had expected. There was an honesty in his voice, a vulnerability that he rarely showed to others. She realized that these moments were becoming the most important parts of their time together as their connection deepened. She began to notice the subtle ways he cared for her well-being. He would check if she was comfortable, if she was eating properly, if she was getting enough rest. These gestures were small but significant, showing a concern that went beyond professional obligation. She found herself reciprocating, offering kindness, attention, and understanding. Their relationship was evolving into a mutual exchange of care and respect. A partnership that existed quietly alongside the demands of their arrangement, despite the growing emotional bond. Both were aware of the limitations of their situation. He had a world that was complicated, demanding, and often isolating. She had her own life, her own ambitions, and her own need for independence. They were careful not to let emotions overwhelm reason, not to let attachment create vulnerability that could be exploited or misunderstood. Yet the more they interacted, the harder it became to maintain emotional distance. The human heart has a way of finding connection, even in the most unlikely circumstances. She began to see the contrast between the public persona he maintained and the private individual he revealed to her. In public, he was composed, decisive, and sometimes intimidating. In private, he was thoughtful, introspective, and surprisingly gentle. This duality fascinated her and deepened her curiosity. She wanted to understand him, to know what shaped the man behind the wealth and power. She found herself listening more closely, observing more keenly, and valuing the moments when he chose to share parts of himself with her one rainy afternoon. They were caught in a sudden downpour while leaving a meeting. They ran under the awning of a nearby building, laughing at their soaked clothes and the chaos of the city around them. In that unplanned moment, the formalities fell away, and they shared a simple human connection. She realized that it was in these unscripted moments, away from the expectations of others, that their bond grew strongest. She felt a warmth and familiarity that was new and comforting as weeks turned into months. They began to anticipate each other's presence, to look forward to shared moments beyond the obligations of the arrangement. She noticed herself thinking about him during quiet hours, wondering how his day had gone, hoping he was well. He in turn began to show subtle signs of caring about her comfort and happiness. Their connection was growing, unspoken, yet undeniable. Rooted in shared experiences, trust, and the small ways in which they attended to each other's needs, she also began to reflect on her own growth. She realized that she was learning to navigate a world that had once seemed intimidating and foreign. She was gaining confidence, poise, and a sense of self-worth that had been eroded by years of struggle. She was discovering the strength in her empathy, the value of her insights, and the power of her presence. The arrangement, which had started as a necessity, was becoming a journey of personal growth, teaching her about resilience, adaptability, the complexities of human connection. There were moments of doubt and fear, of course. She wondered if she was reading too much into gestures. She was allowing herself to feel something that could complicate her life. She worried about losing her independence or making mistakes that could be irreversible. Yet these fears were balanced by the growing trust and understanding between them. She realized that life was not about avoiding risk entirely, but about navigating it with awareness, integrity, and a willingness to embrace possibility one quiet evening. As they prepared for another series of engagements, he paused to speak with her privately. He asked her opinion on matters that were not part of the contract, matters that involved decisions, choices, and perspectives that revealed his respect for her judgment. She felt valued not just as a companion, but as a person whose thoughts and insights mattered. This acknowledgement deepened her sense of connection, showing her that their relationship was evolving into something rare and meaningful as their bond strengthened. She became more attuned to the subtleties of his character. She noticed the moments when he allowed himself to relax, the small smiles that hinted at humor, the ways he showed consideration for others, even in brief interactions. She understood that his wealth and status were not what defined him, but the choices he made, the care he showed, and the trust he placed in her. This realization made her feel privileged to witness the man behind the image. To share moments that were genuine and unguarded, she also began to notice her own feelings more clearly. The warmth she felt in his presence, the anticipation of seeing him, the quiet joy in shared moments all pointed to an emotional bond that went beyond friendship or obligation. She felt a mixture of excitement and caution, knowing that emotions could complicate matters, but also understanding that connection was a fundamental part of being human. She allowed herself to feel, to observe, and to appreciate the moments without rushing or forcing anything. By the end of this period, it was clear that their relationship had grown beyond the initial arrangement. The professional boundaries remained, yet there was a mutual recognition of trust, care, and emotional connection. They had discovered shared understanding, companionship, the subtle ways in which two people could influence each other's lives profoundly without overt acknowledgement. It was a quiet evolution, unnoticed by the outside world, yet powerful and transformative for both of them. She had entered this world out of necessity, seeking financial stability and a temporary respite from her struggles. What she had found was far more complex, far more meaningful. She had discovered a connection that challenged her, inspired her, and revealed the depth of human emotion. He had found someone who could listen, understand, and offer genuine presence in a life often filled with superficial interactions. Together, they had created a space where authenticity could exist, even within the constraints of their arrangement. And so, life continued, a delicate balance of obligation and choice, of rules and shared understanding. Each day brought opportunities to learn, to grow, and to explore the evolving connection between them. They moved through events, meetings, and engagements with poise and awareness, carrying with them a sense of partnership that was quietly transforming both of their lives. It was not yet a story of romance or love, as the world would define it, but it was a story of human connection, trust, and the subtle emergence of feelings that neither had anticipated. She often reflected on the journey so far, marveling at how a decision born out of necessity could lead to experiences that touched the heart and shaped the soul. She had entered this world uncertain and cautious, yet she was leaving each day with new understanding, new confidence, and a growing awareness of the possibilities that life could offer. She realized that connection, empathy, and trust were rare treasures, and she valued each moment she shared with him as something profoundly meaningful. Life had grown into a rhythm. But with rhythm came subtle challenges. The connection between them was undeniable, yet it carried a weight that neither could fully name. She began to notice the hints of a life he kept hidden, glimpses of complexity that went far beyond what she had seen before. There were moments when his phone would ring with calls he could not answer, meetings he would leave abruptly, or letters that arrived and vanished before she could ask. She sensed there was more to him than wealth and status, a hidden world that he guarded carefully. Her curiosity grew, though she tried to suppress it out of respect for their arrangement. She wondered about the pressures he faced, the secrets he might carry, and the decisions that weighed heavily on him. She noticed subtle tension in his expressions, brief moments of distraction, and a seriousness that contrasted with the lighter interactions they shared. These observations sparked both intrigue and concern. She wanted to understand, yet she knew that prying too deeply could break the fragile trust between them one evening. After an exhausting day of events and meetings, they returned to a quiet hotel suite. She was tired, physically and emotionally, yet she sensed that he was troubled in a way that went beyond the ordinary. He paced briefly before settling in a chair, staring at the floor with a heaviness that seemed to anchor the room. She waited patiently, unsure if he would speak, knowing that he rarely shared burdens lightly. Finally, he began to speak in measured tones, revealing fragments of a life shaped by choices, responsibility. In circumstances that were not simple to explain, she listened, holding back questions, focusing instead on the words he offered. He spoke of obligations to people she had never met, decisions that had consequences beyond her imagination, and moments of loss that had shaped his character. It was not a full story, only glimpses, yet each glimpse was revealing. She felt a mixture of empathy, concern, and a deepening respect for the resilience he carried. It became clear that the life he led required strength, careful judgment, and a willingness to bear burdens silently. Her role in his life began to shift subtly. She was no longer just a companion present for social events, but someone who could offer a quiet space for reflection and understanding. He sought her opinion on matters that had nothing to do with appearances, decisions that carried weight, and perspectives that required honesty. She realized that he valued her presence beyond the surface, that he trusted her insight, and that her empathy mattered to him in ways that surprised her. She felt honored and cautious at the same time, understanding the delicate balance required in these moments, despite this growing trust. The mystery of his hidden world created tension. She found herself wondering about the parts of his life he did not reveal, imagining scenarios both troubling and extraordinary. She was aware that wealth and power often came with secrets, and she feared discovering truths that might challenge the bond they had built. At the same time, she felt an irresistible pull to know more, to understand the man behind the carefully curated exterior, to be someone he could confide in fully. The tension between curiosity and caution became a quiet undercurrent in her thoughts one afternoon. While accompanying him to a business meeting, she noticed the way he navigated the room, commanding attention without demanding it, listening carefully while assessing the motivations of everyone present. She realized that the pressures he faced were immense, decisions that could affect not just himself but many others. It was a world she had never imagined, a life filled with responsibility, secrecy, and constant scrutiny. She felt both awe and a little fear, understanding that the man she knew in private was balancing more than she could have guessed later that evening. They were alone once more, and he allowed himself to share a small piece of a personal struggle. He spoke of someone from his past, a situation that had left lasting impact, and a responsibility he could not escape. She listened intently, offering words of comfort and understanding, though she knew the depth of what he carried could never be fully relieved by her presence alone. Yet she realized that even small gestures of empathy mattered, that trust and understanding could create a space for healing, even if only partially. Their connection deepened in these moments. A bond built not just on companionship, but on shared understanding and the quiet acknowledgement of human vulnerability. She began to notice the subtle ways he showed care, through attentiveness, thoughtfulness, and a willingness to include her in parts of his life few others could access. She responded in kind, offering patience, insight, and a listening presence. Their relationship had become a delicate dance of trust, curiosity, and mutual respect, navigating the complexities of emotion and circumstance without overt declaration. Yet there were challenges. She sometimes felt the weight of his world pressing on her indirectly, glimpses of tension and secrecy that made her wonder how much she truly understood. She noticed the careful way he guarded certain aspects of his life, and while she respected it, she could not fully suppress her curiosity. These moments of uncertainty created a mix of fascination and anxiety, as she sought to balance her growing feelings with the practical understanding that much of his life would remain beyond her reach. One weekend he invited her to a retreat, a quiet location away from the city, designed for reflection and privacy. The journey itself was revealing, with moments of shared conversation, quiet observation, and experiences that felt removed from the usual pressures. They spent hours walking along paths lined with trees, discussing topics ranging from personal dreams to abstract thoughts about life and responsibility. She noticed that in this secluded environment, he was more relaxed, more willing to reveal parts of himself he kept hidden in the city. It was a rare privilege, one she absorbed with both curiosity and care during one walk. He paused to speak about a past relationship, a bond that had ended under difficult circumstances, leaving unresolved questions and emotional weight. He spoke with honesty and restraint, acknowledging mistakes, regrets, and lessons learned. She listened without judgment, understanding that his experiences had shaped who he was, including the caution and composure he displayed daily. It was another layer of understanding, revealing the depth of his character. And she felt a quiet admiration for the resilience he displayed in the face of life's challenges over time. She began to see patterns in his behavior, subtle signals of stress, worry, or anticipation. She learned to respond with care, offering words or gestures that could provide comfort or grounding. He, in turn, acknowledged her attentiveness in quiet ways, small nods, and expressions that indicated recognition and appreciation. It was a silent language that grew between them, a shared understanding that did not require formal acknowledgement, but was deeply felt in the spaces between words as the months progressed. She also noticed changes within herself. She was growing more confident, more resolute, and more capable of navigating both her own challenges and the complexities of their shared experiences. She realized that her presence was not passive. She was contributing, influencing, and supporting in meaningful ways. The arrangement that had begun as a necessity was evolving into a mutual partnership, a space where both could share, grow, and find connection despite the pressures and expectations of the world around them. There were moments when she felt fear and doubt. The secrecy of his world, the potential consequences of mistakes, and the ambiguity of their relationship created tension that she could not ignore. She questioned her role, wondered if she was overstepping, and feared the impact of emotional attachment. Yet each time she reflected on these fears, she realized that they were part of navigating a life that was both extraordinary and unpredictable. She learned to embrace uncertainty while maintaining awareness. Patience and care. One evening, after a long day, they sat together in quiet reflection. He shared thoughts on decisions he had to make, the ethical and emotional weight they carried, and the moments of isolation that accompanied leadership. She listened closely, offering insight and empathy, understanding that her role was not to solve problems, but to provide a human presence that could ease the burden in subtle ways. It was a reminder that connection could be transformative. Even when the challenges were immense and the pressures relentless, the deeper she became involved in his world, the more she recognized the contrast between appearances and reality. In public, he was composed, authoritative, and sometimes intimidating. In private, he was thoughtful, introspective, and quietly vulnerable. This duality fascinated her, and she found herself drawn not to the wealth or power, but to the humanity beneath it. She realized that true connection required understanding the whole person, not just the surface. And she valued the trust he placed in her by allowing glimpses of his private self one afternoon. She accidentally discovered a file on his tablet while preparing documents for a meeting. It was labeled ambiguously, but as she glanced at it, she realized it contained information hinting at challenges, conflicts, and personal matters he had not shared. Her curiosity surged, yet she quickly reminded herself of the trust and discretion that defined their connection. She chose not to probe further, understanding that some secrets were hers to respect, even as they intensified the mystery and deepened her. interest in his life, these experiences highlighted the balance she needed to maintain, to care without intruding, to observe without judging, and to engage without overstepping. Each interaction was an opportunity to learn, to support, and to understand the human being she had grown close to. She realized that the emotional depth of their relationship was developing quietly, gradually, and that patience was necessary for it to continue without breaking the trust that had been established the months past. And the bond between them strengthened in subtle, meaningful ways. Shared glances, quiet gestures, thoughtful conversation, and mutual respect created a foundation that neither could deny. They both understood the risks and limitations, yet they embraced the connection because it provided comfort, understanding, and a sense of companionship that was rare and valuable. Their lives were intertwined in ways neither had expected, and the evolution of their relationship was as natural as it was profound. She reflected often on the journey, marveling at how an arrangement born of necessity had developed into a connection that touched the heart, shaped perspective, and revealed resilience in both of them. She had grown in confidence, empathy, and self-awareness. He had revealed glimpses of vulnerability, trust, and humanity. Together, they navigated a world filled with expectation, secrecy, and pressure, creating a bond that was private, authentic, and transformative. The realization that their connection had moved beyond the initial boundaries was both thrilling and sobering. They were cautious, yet drawn to each other, aware of the complexity of emotions developing alongside the demands of their lives. Their partnership was evolving into something deeply human, something defined by trust, understanding, and the quiet recognition that connection could exist even in the most unlikely circumstances. And so, their lives continued in this delicate balance, a dance of trust, curiosity, and evolving emotion. The arrangement remained, but it was no longer merely transactional. It was a space of growth, reflection, and understanding, where two people navigated the hidden layers of life, offering care and empathy, learning about themselves and each other, and discovering the subtle ways human connection could change everything without words or promises. The days had grown longer and heavier, yet there was a quiet intensity in their connection that neither could ignore. She had become more attuned to the subtle signals of his life, the unspoken worries, the weight of responsibilities, and the glimpses of vulnerability that he rarely allowed others to see. She felt a sense of responsibility, not in a controlling way, but as someone who cared deeply for the well-being of another human being. The more she learned, the more she realized that his life was far more complicated than she had ever imagined it. Began with small hints, the type that anyone paying attention would notice but might dismiss. She noticed the guarded way he handled phone calls, the careful wording in emails, and the sudden shifts in mood when certain topics were mentioned. At first, she had thought it was the stress of work or the normal demands of wealth and influence. But slowly, she began to understand that there was a deeper layer, a secret he had carried for years. She felt a mixture of curiosity, concern, and apprehension, unsure of how to approach something that was both personal and potentially fragile. One evening, as they prepared for a series of meetings, he seemed distracted, unusually quiet. She observed him, noting the tension in his shoulders, the distant look in his eyes, and the subtle sighs that betrayed his inner burden. She did not speak immediately, choosing instead to be present, understanding that some moments required patience rather than conversation. After a while, he invited her to sit with him in a quiet lounge, away from the noise and expectations of the day. The invitation felt significant. A sign that he was ready to share something deeper, he began slowly, carefully revealing pieces of his past that he had never spoken aloud. It was not the entire story, but fragments, moments that painted a picture of a life shaped by secrecy, responsibility, and difficult choices. He spoke of family matters, obligations that could not be ignored, and decisions that had consequences far beyond what she could comprehend. She listened without interruption, absorbing the weight of his words, understanding that this was a rare opportunity to witness the man behind the composed exterior. She had come to know, she realized, that his secrecy was not meant to exclude her, but to protect both of them. The world he inhabited was filled with scrutiny, judgment, and people whose intentions were not always clear. He had learned long ago to navigate carefully, to reveal only what was necessary, and to safeguard his privacy at all costs. Yet in sharing even these fragments, he was offering her trust, a gesture that spoke volumes about the depth of their connection and the respect he held for her insight and discretion. As the conversation continued, she noticed how carefully he chose his words, how he measured what he revealed and what he withheld. She felt a mixture of empathy and determination, a desire to understand without overstepping, to offer support without judgment. She realized that their bond had reached a point where honesty and vulnerability were possible, even in small doses. The trust between them had evolved into something rare, a silent acknowledgement that each could rely on the other. Even when the rest of the world remained unaware, he spoke of a critical situation that had been shaping his life for years, a secret that few could comprehend and even fewer could influence. It was a matter that required discretion, judgment, and unwavering attention. She felt the weight of the revelation pressing upon her, a mixture of awe, concern, and a quiet understanding that her role in his life had grown more significant than she had anticipated. She realized that the arrangement that had brought them together was now intertwined with trust, emotional connection, and the responsibility of safeguarding what he had revealed. The revelation was not just about events or circumstances. It was about the way he lived, the way he made decisions, and the sacrifices he had endured. She saw the complexity of his character, the blend of strength and vulnerability, careful balance between public persona and private truth. She understood that his life was not simple, that every choice carried weight, and that the trust he placed in her was an acknowledgement of her ability to understand and navigate these complexities. In the days following this revelation, she noticed subtle changes in their interactions. He seemed more relaxed around her, less guarded in small ways, allowing glimpses of humor and warmth that had previously been rare. She, in turn, felt a stronger sense of empathy and connection, recognizing that the trust he had extended was a privilege, one that required patience, respect, and careful attention. Their bond deepened in a quiet, unspoken way, built on understanding and the shared experience of navigating the hidden layers of his life. One afternoon, they found themselves walking through a secluded park, a rare moment away from obligations and scrutiny. The environment was calm, the sounds of the city muted by distance and trees. He spoke of past mistakes, lessons learned, and the ways he had tried to balance personal desire with duty and responsibility. She listened closely, appreciating the honesty and vulnerability in his voice. It was clear that these moments were transformative for both of them, offering insight, perspective, and the deepening of a connection that had evolved slowly over time. She began to reflect on her own growth as well. The experience of being part of his life, witnessing his challenges, and offering understanding had taught her resilience, patience, and the subtle power of empathy. She realized that she had become more self-aware, more confident in navigating complex emotional landscapes, and more attuned to the nuances of human behavior. The bond between them had become a mirror, reflecting both the strengths and vulnerabilities they carried individually and together. Despite the growing trust and connection, there were still moments of tension. She was acutely aware of the fragile balance between intimacy and boundaries, curiosity and respect, and emotional connection and professional obligation. There were times when she wondered if she was prepared for the weight of his secrets, the implications of the revelations, and the potential consequences of emotional attachment. Yet, these doubts were tempered by the realization that their connection was genuine, rooted in trust, and capable of withstanding complexity if handled with care. One evening, during a quiet dinner in a private suite, he revealed a decision he had been struggling with for months. It involved personal, financial, and social consequences that were significant and unavoidable. She listened without interruption, offering her perspective when asked, acknowledging the difficulty of the choice and providing reassurance through her presence. The moment underscored the depth of trust between them, highlighting the fact that their bond had moved far beyond the initial arrangement and into a space of shared understanding and mutual reliances. The revelation unfolded. She realized that the life he led required extraordinary resilience and judgment. Every decision had ripple effects, every action had consequences, and every relationship carried potential risk. She admired his capacity to navigate this world while maintaining composure, empathy, and a sense of morality. At the same time, she felt the weight of being part of this life, understanding that her presence was valued, not just for companionship, but for the quiet support and judgment she provided in moments of vulnerability. The days that followed were filled with reflection and adjustment. She observed the subtle ways he integrated her into his life, not just as a companion, but as a trusted confidant. She noticed how he shared small details, sought her opinion on matters beyond the surface, and allowed moments of vulnerability that were rare and precious. She felt a sense of purpose and significance. Understanding that the trust he extended was an acknowledgement of her integrity, empathy, and ability to navigate complexity without judgment, she also began to see the humanity behind his public persona. The pressures, the expectations, and the scrutiny he faced were immense. Yet he carried them with a quiet dignity and determination. She understood that the life of a public figure, a person of wealth and influence, was not glamorous in the ways imagined by outsiders. It required constant vigilance, careful navigation, and the ability to make difficult decisions with limited support. Her admiration for his resilience grew, along with a sense of responsibility to honor the trust he had placed in her. There were moments of quiet reflection where she considered the trajectory of their relationship. What had started as a paid arrangement had evolved into something far more meaningful, a connection built on trust, empathy, and shared experience. She acknowledged the risks, the potential for misunderstanding, and the challenges inherent in navigating emotional complexity within such a unique context. Yet she also recognized the rare opportunity they had created, a space where authenticity and human connection could exist despite external pressures and secrecy. One rainy afternoon, they found themselves seeking shelter in a small cafe. The storm outside mirrored the intensity of the revelations they had navigated recently. They sat in silence for a while, allowing the quiet to wash over them, before he began to speak about his hopes for the future. It was not a discussion of business or social obligation, but a reflection on personal goals, relationships, and the desire for trust and companionship in a life that often felt isolating. She listened closely, appreciating the rare glimpse into his aspirations and fears. She realized that their journey was far from over. The revelation had deepened their connection, but it had also introduced new complexities. They were now navigating not only the boundaries of their original arrangement, but also the emotional landscape created by trust, empathy, and shared understanding. Each interaction required awareness, patience, and careful judgment, and she felt both challenged and inspired by the opportunity to engage at this level. Bond between them continued to strengthen through shared experiences, quiet moments, and the understanding that vulnerability and trust were precious commodities. She saw the subtle ways he demonstrated care through attentiveness, thoughtful actions, and moments of reflection that acknowledged her presence and insight. She, in turn, offered patience, empathy, and thoughtful engagement, understanding that the human heart requires both attention and respect to flourish through these experiences. She discovered the profound impact of human connection. The revelation of his secrets had shifted the dynamic of their relationship, creating a deeper sense of intimacy, trust, and mutual reliance. She realized that connection is not defined by circumstance alone, but by the willingness to be present, to understand, and to offer empathy without expectation. Their relationship had evolved into something rare and transformative, a partnership built on authenticity, trust, and shared experience. And so, the days continued with a sense of quiet intensity. The revelation had changed everything, introducing new layers of complexity, vulnerability, and opportunity. They navigated the challenges together, relying on trust, empathy, and understanding to guide their interactions. The connection between them was no longer merely transactional. It had become a living, evolving bond. It's rich with meaning and the promise of deeper understanding as they continued to explore the hidden layers of life and each other.